I can hardly see you back there. It's a long ways.
Yeah, the last time we were here, this was in the temple. So now I feel like you're all a little farther away. But it's important because you're ingredients of this meal. So even if you can't come here physically, maybe you could send your spirits over. Because we're going to be asking for your participation and questions. So I'm Eve, and this is Bernie. Let me ask you if I can see. Oh, if I do this, Bernie, you can see people better. You see?
Yeah, great. A miracle has occurred.
Yeah. No, I need to ask a question. That's why I'm doing this. So, how many people here know something about either Bernie, Glasman, or Zen Peacemakers? Oh, good. So we don't have to say too much. But I'll say just...
Not so many.
Bernie, enough people here have heard about you. Come on. I'll say something. So Bernie is a Zen teacher, a Zen master. It sounds like such a big title. I always raise my eyes when I hear that. And he founded a family, a lineage called the Zen Peacemakers. And that family, so there's a number of different families in Zen, but the Zen Peacemakers is probably best known for its social action work and peacemaking work in many different areas, in most areas, in terms of, work with inmates in prisons and work with the people with contemplative care of those who are dying, conflict resolution, working in poverty-stricken areas, working in different continents and in many different countries, working now a lot with immigrants around Europe, a lot of the immigrants coming from Africa up to Europe. And so there's a lot of those activities going on by many groups that were started by teachers, that he made teachers and associated groups. So that's what that family is known for. And that's what he's known for. And I think you'll get more of a flavor of that over the next few days. But in broad strokes, that's what Zen Peacemakers is known for, that it took a practice that is about awakening and took it to working in the barrios, in poor areas, in Rwanda, and now in Black Hills of the Dakotas, in different areas, and see what unfolds. When we talked about this evening and what to do here this time, it was my suggestion to follow a format that Bernie's been doing over the last year. So we all have our milestones. And starting when he turned 75, he pretty much started looking at his life in terms of 60 years of practice. And he has been doing 60 years of Zen practice. And he divides it into 20, 20, and 20. 3 periods of 20 years. And that's very interesting for me. I have not done Zen practice for 60 years. But I think that no matter what practice we do and for how long, it changes over time. And looking back, we can look at what those first, I don't care if you started a week ago, you've already had 7 days, and there's probably been some change, you see? So on some level, all of us, I feel, have 60 years, or the equivalent of that somewhere, when we look at what has changed. What was once very important, what became less important, Where did I suddenly really want to put my energies, and where don't I? So that's been an interesting topic, and when we talk, and especially when he speaks to people, the way Bernie talks about is those first 20 years of being in a zendo. A zendo is a meditation hall. Being and teaching in a meditation hall. And what that practice is really about. And the second 20 years is about bringing it to people, to social action, to making peace. And we'll talk about that. And finally, the third 20 years is bringing the practice to the streets. And what is that? And actually, we were just discussing that question earlier this evening. So these are questions we raise, and we don't always have the answers. So it's an inquiry that we're making personally, and that might be interesting to you. Me too, might be your inquiry. So, Bernie.
Yes, Eve.
So those first 20 years, studying at the Zen Center of Los Angeles, helping build that, starting the Zen Peacemakers of the Zen community of New York, building that. And those are meditation halls. So for me, first question that comes up for me is, what is this business about getting enlightened? What is that quest to awaken? And how does it start? And awakening to what exactly?
Good question. Anybody got an answer out there? So I'm sure you know, maybe you don't know, the word Buddha means an awakened one. And Buddhism, the practice of Buddhism that both of us are involved in, started with a man, a Shakyamuni Buddha. And of course, there was a tradition which you're involved in and which he was involved in, which went many, many years before Shakyamuni Buddha. That's only 2,500 years ago. But that practice put emphasis on awakening. And the question is, awakening to what? Awakening to the experience of the oneness of life, the interconnectedness of life. So the Buddhist tradition is all about helping us to awaken to the interconnectedness of life, the oneness of life. And within Buddhism, there are many schools, and the schools all appeared because they stressed different upayas. Upayas are expedient means, ways of reaching, of having that experience of the oneness of life. Zen, which just a Japanese pronunciation of the Indian word jhana, means meditation. So the Zen school stressed meditation as the way to awaken. But within the Zen school, many different techniques arose. And they became sort of exotic. They were screaming and hitting, and they were techniques trying to get past the dualistic functioning of the brain, or trying to get to the space of non-duality. In that space of non-duality, of course, it's the oneness of life. And so the techniques were trying to get us to experience that state. can you remain in that experience? That's a little bit more difficult. So then there were other techniques of how to try to explain that state and how to remain for periods of time in that state. In the Zen peacemakers, so I'm skipping a little, Zen peacemakers don't occur. I always have to go to my wife to figure out when all these things happened. The Zen peacemakers happens when I was 55, so a little over 20 years ago. And one of the cores of that practice is called the three tenets of first not knowing. Not knowing is another way of saying non-duality. When we talk dualistically, it's knowledge. This is this, this is that. This is non-duality is beyond this and that. It's the experience of oneness. So not knowing is, as our first tenet, means approach every situation as if it's the first time. With everything you know, get as much knowledge as you can, accumulate as much knowledge as you can, and then approach the situation blank, with deep listening. Don't be bound or fettered by any of the knowledge you have. Not so easy, right? Not so easy. So we have to develop ways and techniques and methods, upayas, we call them, to help us to experience that state of not knowing, how to approach something totally fresh and deeply listen. Second is bearing witness, means to stay there, to be in that situation. Meditation is bearing witness to the wholeness of life. That's one form of bearing witness. Many forms of bearing witness, being with a loved one who's dying. You can help but bear witness to what's happening. Third, we're going to talk a lot more about about these three, because I'm only supposed to be talking, according to my wife, about the first 20 years, and I'm talking more later on. The third, I started off calling the third Tikkun Olam, because originally I was born into a Jewish family, a Jewish socialist family, not a religious family. And life was about the repair or the healing of the world. The Indians copied, in the Jewish tradition, we have a word called mensch. The Indians copied it and called it a bodhisattva. You may have heard of bodhisattvas, I don't know. But it comes from the Jewish tradition of mensch culture. At any rate, so the third was, and then because not the whole world doesn't know Hebrew, we try different words. We called it loving action, healing actions, and now we're calling it action, doing the acts that arise out of not knowing and bearing witness. And in the background, we know those turn out to be tikkun olam. But we don't have to say that. We could just say we're going to... That is not to just say, aha, that's wonderful, that's what we should do, but to do it. Act. It's very important. Okay. So, 60 years ago, my wife and I, well, I wasn't married 60 years ago. So 60 years ago, I read a book in which it talked about Zen Buddhism, and I started to practice. And I started to practice by myself, because I didn't know, I wanted to practice this thing I read about Zen, but I didn't know where to go. Or what. So I read what books there were. There weren't that many books in English. I read what books there were, and I created my own meditation hall. I had a garage, and I had a place, and I sat, and I did my own retreats. And then at one point, I had an experience which was in my training, or my practice, my path along the way, gets delineated, or I transition from thing to thing, or some major changes happen out of some experience that happened. And the first experience, which I don't talk about too much, I was practicing doing meditation by myself. I was doing what I thought you were supposed to do by reading, whatever. And all of a sudden, I disappeared. And what occurred, I thought I went insane. I got tremendously frightened. I couldn't go to sleep. I had to keep the lights on all night. And I dropped meditation and stopped the practice of Zen. Now, I had no teacher. I was just doing this myself. I stopped all of that for about a year. And then I ran into a man who was to become my root teacher. So that first experience taught me the value of having a teacher and the danger of doing this alone. That's what it taught me, at least. I had nobody to talk to about what had happened. And I was full of fear. That's not the best of experiences. And then finding a teacher, and at that time, I'm now married, and my wife and I were what one might call back then hippies, and we wanted to start a commune. In fact, I had already gone to Israel searching out whether to live in a kibbutz. I was oriented that way. And I had heard of some kibbutz, some places where they actually were doing some Eastern kind of stuff. So I went and I explored. And I didn't find what I wanted. So I came back. But we were looking to start a commune. And instead we joined with my teacher and a few other people in what was called a Zen center. To me, it was our version of a commune. Later on, I realized I was entering a monastery. But I had a family. And the people that joined, we all had families. So in some sense, it looked like a commune because we all had families. But the rules and the regulations were that of a monastery. It's not a good mixture. Most of those families broke up. Most of those marriages separated. Because, I was in the Zendo, in the meditation hall every morning when my kids were waking up and going to school. I was in the meditation hall every evening when they were going to bed. I was in the meditation hall every weekend. So I hardly got to see them. I was a terrible father. And it wasn't until later that I made amends with my kids and we became a happy family again. But I was a very dedicated practitioner, and I was working with everybody who came to our Zen center. That's all I would work with. I wouldn't work with my family because they weren't coming to the Zen center. I didn't work with people who didn't come. I was working just with those. And what was I working to do? In all these different phases of my life, my main thrust has been how to help, how to assist in people having the experience of the oneness of life, the interconnectedness of life. What changed during these 20 years, different